Donald Trump's run for president be over before it's begun? Voters in Iowa deliver stunning setback to the Republican frontrunner, and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton gets the fright of her life. The race for the White House is on, and this is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. The first vote of the 2016 U.S. presidential election has delivered a night of high drama and a political shock. After trailing in the polls, Texas Senator Ted Cruz has won the Iowa Republican Caucus, beating frontrunner Donald Trump. On the Democrat side, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders were virtually tied. And these are the results in detail. Of the 11 Republicans in the race, Cruz came first with nearly 28% of the vote. Billionaire businessman Trump got 24% for second place. He was almost beaten into third by Marco Rubio, who got 23% of the vote and is now the bookie favorite. In the Democratic race, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders could hardly have been closer. The former Secretary of State got just under 50% of the vote. Self-declared socialist, Sanders took 49.5%. Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley dropped out after his poor showing with less than 1%. Here's Kimberly Halkett with more from Des Moines in Iowa.
For hours, it was a race too close to call.
Tonight, while the results are still not known, it looks like we are in a virtual tie.
After polling behind Democratic rival Hillary Clinton for months, Senator Bernie Sanders closed the gap with his anti-establishment message, essentially shifting the tone and dynamics of the Democratic campaign.
It is rare that we have the opportunity we do now to have a real contest of ideas, to really think hard about what the Democratic Party stands for and what we want the future of our country to look like.
On the Republican side, the results of the Iowa caucus were more definitive.
God bless the great state of Iowa.
After spending millions of dollars and months of campaigning, Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz was celebrating.
Tonight is a victory for courageous conservatives across Iowa and all across this great nation.
A less impressive but still strong finish for Donald Trump, who went into the caucus polling in first place. He was uncharacteristically humble as he thanked his supporters.
There were 17 candidates. I was told by everybody, do not go to Iowa. You could never finish even in the top 10. We finished second, and I want to tell you something. I'm just honored. I'm really honored.
So this is the moment they said would never happen.
Most surprising was the showing by Senator Marco Rubio, who promised if he becomes the Republican presidential nominee, he would rebuild the U.S. military and defend gun rights he says have been eroded under a Democratic White House.
After 7 years of Barack Obama, we are not waiting any longer to take our country back.
With the snowstorm looming, pollsters had predicted a low voter turnout. It wasn't the case. Thousands lined up to caucus and declare their support for candidates.
Tonight, I have to tell you that I am suspending this presidential bid.
But a few did not survive the Iowa caucus. Democratic candidate Martin O'Malley and Republican Mike Huckabee ended their campaigns after finishing with less than 2% support. Hillary Clinton had the most to lose in Iowa. Falling from her position as frontrunner, she now trails Bernie Sanders as she heads to New Hampshire. It signals that the once clear victory for Clinton for the Democratic presidential nomination is now distant, and instead ahead is a grueling fight.
Let's bring in our guests. In Philadelphia, Joe Watkins, former White House aide to President George H.W. Bush. In New York, Ryan Grimm, Washington bureau chief for the Huffington Post. And in London, James Boyes, author of the book Hillary Rising. Good to have all three of you on the show. Thank you very much. So, Joe Watkins, I mean, off they go. Quite a start to the race. What did you make of it?
Well, quite a start. It just shows the importance of ground game. Ted Cruz has such a strong ground organization. It really helped him to hang on to the evangelical conservative votes that he thought he had heading into the caucuses. Donald Trump did not have the kind of strong ground game that he needed to really translate his impressive poll numbers into actually caucus support. And so, as a result, he came in second. And surprising, of course, was the performance of Marco Rubio, who came in a surprisingly strong third, actually almost tying Donald Trump, tying him in terms of the number of delegates that he won. So, a very, very good night for Marco Rubio. Lots of momentum for him. What you cannot forget is the fact that Ted Cruz still has a sizable financial advantage over some of the other candidates. He's raised a lot of money, and so he's very well positioned heading into New Hampshire.
You say he had a good ground operation underway, but did you expect him to do this well, despite that, and the money?
Well, I don't know that I expect him to do quite as well as he did. I thought that the endorsements of Sarah Palin and Jerry Falwell Jr. would certainly help Donald Trump in the closing week of the campaign in Iowa. But you have to still couple those kinds of endorsements with ground game. Ted Cruz had 12,000 volunteers. They were making 20,000 phone calls a day. And so with that kind of support and that kind of a ground game, it's hard to overcome. His people were calling constantly, asking the people that were committed to him to stay committed to him. And they obviously stuck with him because he ended up getting a larger margin than anybody thought he would. Certainly the margin that he won by wasn't what was predicted by the polls.
Let's talk about margins, James, boys. Hillary Clinton was expected to win easily, not like this. I mean, it really is game on now, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. Not that long ago, there was an expectation that she would win quite handily in Iowa and then lose quite heavily in New Hampshire. The fact that last night came so close and that really, the victory was not announced until very, very late in the day will be of scant consolation to Hillary Clinton. I mean, she said in her expression that she was extremely grateful and that she was clearly very, very happy to have won, but she would have been a lot happier if that margin of victory had been a lot wider. She really needed far more of a cushion going forward. I mean, the headlines will say Hillary wins, but let's be honest, it was a real squeaker, and she needed to demonstrate, I think, far greater traction in Iowa, where she had invested, great amounts of time, money, and energy this time round, which of course she wasn't able to do successfully 8 years ago. So
I was going to say, I should imagine
we move on to New Hampshire.
That she's probably having nightmares remembering what happened 8 years ago. I mean, psychologically, I should imagine that this has quite an impact on her and her campaign.
Well, I think that they will say, look, fundamentally we've won. We can draw a line under this. Iowa was always going to be slightly difficult for Hillary Clinton for various reasons. As the race goes on, of course, it should theoretically get easier for her. But has she lost some of that sort of magic touch, that sense of the big mo, as the former President George H.W. Bush used to famously refer to it, moving on? The inevitability factor that she was counting upon might not be there. I think fundamentally she will pull through this, but certainly Bernie Sanders has given her a bloody nose in Iowa last night.
Ryan Grimm at Huffington Post, were you tearing up your copy, or rather deleting the script when you saw how it played out that you'd prepared for publication?
We were pretty close. This didn't throw us too badly. We're in kind of a new era of politics, and where everything is kind of up in the air and open for question. But if you go with what you understood about politics before this era, then you did see Ted Cruz coming. As was said, organization still matters. And this is a place where national politics kind of meets real life. This is something that we all follow as junkies extremely closely, but the regular person doesn't. So in other words, this is just a Monday night for a lot of people in Iowa. There are well more than 1 million people who live in Iowa. Over 100,000 of them only showed up for the Republican caucus. So the question then becomes, who can get their tens of thousands of people, and that's the tiny number that we're talking about, to show up at a church or a community center and caucus for Ted Cruz. And because he had this huge ground game, just relentless harassment of his people who had said that he was supportive of them, he was able to get them out. And he also pulled this kind of dirty trick towards the very end, where he sent out to all his supporters what was called an election. He called it an election violation. And it was built around some political science work that said that if you kind of shame people and tell them that you're watching them, we will expose you to your neighbors if we find out that you didn't vote, that you can actually goose turnout by some 5%. And it was so close with Donald Trump that there's no question in my mind that he got several thousand extra votes around this. The Iowa Secretary of State complained about it, said it was mimicking official documents. But this is the way that Ted Cruz operates, and it shouldn't have been surprising to anybody that he would do this at the last minute.
Well, great getting all of your thoughts, but here's how one American newspaper has reported the results. Look at that picture. Dead clown walking is the splash in the New York Daily News. They've mocked up an image of Donald Trump with a red nose. Harsh, perhaps, but I'm just wondering what our guests think. What do you think of that, Ryan Grimm? I mean, is he a dead clown walking?
We'll see. You don't want to count your clowns out just yet. He's certainly a clown walking. He is still very much up in the polls in New Hampshire and South Carolina and nationally. His entire campaign, though, is premised on him being a quote-unquote winner. What's he going to do for people? He's going to make them win. What's he going to do for America? He's going to make it win. And he's going to do so much winning that we're going to get bored of winning, he says. These are the kinds of things that actually fall out of his mouth, Donald Trump. So now, what is a winner who has lost? He has said many times in the past, nobody cares about second place. Last night, he came out a deeply chastened, kind of humbled Donald Trump, a man that nobody had seen in the campaign so far. He gave an extremely short speech. He said he was going to buy a farm in Iowa, which is bizarre because that's an American idiom for dying. And now he's on to New Hampshire. So if this changes him, if this takes away the aura of winnerness around Donald Trump, then it does unravel because there's nothing else behind his campaign. It's entirely a facade built on this idea that he's a winner. So now that he's been exposed as a loser, he's in serious trouble.
And the second winners, as the Republicans say, don't really stand a chance, do they, Joe?
New Hampshire's coming, and the poll data there so far is a little bit different. Ground game matters there too, but these contests are a series of statewide contests that the candidates have to win, and Iowa, of course, is the first challenge. It doesn't mean that whoever wins the Iowa caucuses becomes the party's nominee. Certainly, in the last couple of cycles, that hasn't been the case. I mean, Huckabee won in 2008, did not end up as the party's eventual nominee. Santorum won the Iowa caucuses in 2012. Didn't register at all very well last night, came in about last, but nonetheless, in 2012, he came in first, but clearly did not win the party nomination. So what Trump realizes is that he's got to do a much better job on the ground with his organization, and he's got to have people on the ground that are really working for him to make sure that his voters show up at the polls to vote. Because what your poll numbers say doesn't mean nearly as much as who shows up to vote for you on the day of the election. So he's got New Hampshire to worry about right now. He's got a projected big lead there, but in order to sustain that lead and make it really happen, he's got to make sure that his voters show up on that day. And then he's got to watch out for a surging Ted Cruz, who's not expected to do as well in New Hampshire, but who has certainly money and organization and will probably place better than was expected earlier. And then Marco Rubio, who is much, much stronger than anybody expected, certainly right now the leading establishment candidate for Republicans. And it'll be a question to see whether or not Rubio is able to upend some of the establishment Republicans who've been on the ground and have banked their whole campaigns on winning New Hampshire. That would be Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, John Kasich. Those are three establishment candidates who have really bet the farm on New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay, Joe, so you spoke
New Hampshire
quite a
comes
bit.
South Carolina, Nevada.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry, you spoke quite a bit about the ground operation, and let's look at an important figure from the entrance polls. It appears that Donald Trump couldn't turn his support among blue-collar workers into votes. He got 28% of Republican voters without college degrees, behind Cruz, whose superior ground operation, as we've been talking about, delivered 31%. I mean, James, people are saying that he's been crucified. Was Cruz a better player here, not just looking at the ground operation, or was, as many people say, Trump's swagger and brazen insults, has that been off-putting?
I think ultimately, as both Joe and Ryan were alluding to here, we need to differentiate between figures that are put out in terms of people saying who they're going to vote for in theoretical polls and actually those who actually turn up to vote. One of the things that's interesting to consider, of course, is that when you look at various polling operations, and it's very rarely revealed who the people are who are responding to polling questions. Only about 9% of people respond to these people. You often get very disproportionate demographics, usually older people responding to polling questions. And of course, as we discovered last night, there's an awful gulf between people saying they're going to vote for someone and those who are actually going to turn out and vote. And one of the reasons I think that Trump has come up short is that he hasn't got that organizational structure which more seasoned politicians, whether you agree with them or not, have at their disposal. We were talking about the sort of numbers there that Cruz was able to put on the street to jiggy up people to physically get them out to caucus for him. And that's clearly where Trump has come up short. It's going to be very interesting to see how and to what extent he's able to carry this forward into New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, for example, and heading into Super Tuesday. Because clearly he's going to come up against a whole host of these organizational issues. And as long as you've got a candidacy which is focused solely upon the ego of an individual candidate, that's all well and good on camera, but if it can't translate into ground game and a ground support, then it really is just a lot of hot air.
Ryan Grimm, what do you make of this now three-man race, if I can put it that way? I mean, you've got Trump there. We've discussed him, his popularity and his flaws. You've got Cruz. He's known for shutting down government, not sure what more he can offer than that at this stage. Where does this leave Rubio, who looks like the more sort of liberal out of this team, but he is anti-abortionist and he's a foreign policy hawk too?
And not only that, in a recent debate and also in a Fox News interview, he was asked about shutting down mosques and Muslim cafes, whatever those are, and he said we should close those down. And he said radical Muslims don't have access to First Amendment free speech rights. He has been doing everything he can to become as extreme for the primary as Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. Meanwhile, he wants to kind of stay over to the side, let Ted Cruz and Donald Trump duke it out, bloody each other up, and then he wants the kind of establishment wing to coalesce around him without having to actually embrace the establishment wing, because if he does that, it's kind of it's death for him. He wants to say he's just as insurgent as these other two candidates are, but that's of course not the case. He has tens of millions of dollars, from the establishment that are boosting him. The problem for him is that he needs Jeb Bush to drop out of this election, and for Jeb Bush's money and supporters to all gravitate towards him. But they now have a kind of blood feud going on, and it's not clear if Jeb Bush is going to clear the way for him, or if he's going to stay in just to cause trouble for him. Jeb was kind of a mentor for Marco Rubio. Rubio, his protege, brought him up through the Florida political system. And as you know, there's really no greater animosity between two people than those who used to be close friends, who've only recently turned on each other. So that's a major factor going forward. This kind of personal kind of distaste between the two of those. But yes, if you had to put your money on it at the moment, it's very hard to see Ted Cruz or Donald Trump winning the nomination. It then has to go to the last man standing, and that would be Rubio. The problem for the establishment so far is that you can't beat somebody with nobody. Their nobody now seems to be Marco Rubio.
All right, let's move on to the Democratic Party. It seems that not only in this show but everywhere else, the Republicans are drawing more of the media attention, and the entrance polls show that a huge generational divide happened among Democrat supporters. Bernie Sanders won a massive 84% of Democrats under the age of 30, while Hillary Clinton's support was highest among older voters. 69% of people aged 65 and older voted for her. What happened there, James?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? Neither of these two candidates could be termed as a spring chicken, and yet here we have college students in particular going for Bernie Sanders in much the same way that sort of demographic went for G. McCarthy in '68, and older demographics going for Hillary Clinton. I think that what we could consider from that is that that younger generation has never known Washington, D.C. without Hillary Clinton at its heart, be it as Secretary of State, as Senator, or First Lady. And as a result, therefore, she is the establishment, incredibly enough, whereas Bernie Sanders has come along and basically playing almost much more of a radical approach to American politics and talking about an old school approach to the Democratic Party, harking back almost to a pre-Clinton era. I think many people forget the extent to which the Clintons, if we can refer to them that way, almost made the modern Democratic Party electable again after being out of power for a political generation. It'll be fascinating to see how this plays out moving forward, whether Bernie Sanders is able to parley that support heading into New Hampshire and vitally once you hit South Carolina and Super Tuesday. There's no doubt that the Clinton team have set a firewall for Super Tuesday and are hoping and betting the farm effectively upon a strong showing on that day. And of course, if she doesn't, where does the Democratic Party go at that point? We saw O'Malley drop out last night. Is it really going to be Sanders if Hillary Clinton stumbles, or will someone else come to the rescue in a white knight mode? Very difficult to see at this point.
Joe, you know how this all works. This victory for Sanders, will it mean that he'll suddenly start getting a lot more money? Will people start pumping money towards him? And does he now stand a chance, do you think, of beating Hillary Clinton?
Well, clearly his performance in Iowa last night is going to help him raise a lot more money. He's already surged in terms of his fundraising in the last few weeks, and he was just saying earlier today that the average donation is about $27. I mean, he just has hundreds of thousands of people donating on his website, BernieSanders.com. And he's really hit a nerve with young people, but not just young people, but with new voters and with people who are just upset with the establishment in the United States, especially those who are upset by the economic circumstances that continue here. Bernie Sanders is speaking directly to that. He's saying, if you're upset about wages and about the lack of growth in wages, if you're upset about the fact that you may be employed but you're underemployed, if you're upset about the fact that your economic opportunity is not as bright as it would have been 15 or 20 or 30 years ago, you need to be with me because I'm going to change the economic order in the United States. And that's a big statement right now where you have 25% or more of the long-term unemployed occupying as part of the unemployment rate. You've got a 5% rate of unemployment, which is a good number for the United States, but you've got a 62.6 or 7% labor participation rate, which means that nearly 40% of those who can participate in the labor market aren't participating for whatever reason. So you've got a lot of people who are not participating in the job market, a lot of people who are underemployed, a lot of people who are not happy about their wage growth. And Bernie Sanders is speaking to those people, and he's really striking a strong chord with them. So he's going to be able to raise money for his campaign. If he's able to build a strong organization fast enough to be able to compete with her in South Carolina and on Super Tuesday, then this will be a real campaign.
Ryan, briefly, if you will, has this caused people in the U.S. to readjust their gaze?
Definitely, and it particularly as it relates to Clinton, this kind of betrays a terrific amount of political weakness on her part. We've seen this economic populism coming on the Democratic side for 5 years now, and she hasn't been able to capture it. Bernie Sanders is not even a registered Democrat. He's what he calls himself, a democratic socialist. For instance, he honeymooned in the Soviet Union. I mean, great for him. I'm sure it was a wonderful time. But this is not a major politician that should have given Hillary Clinton this kind of run for her money, and the fact that she only came up with a tie shows that she's not as much of a shoo-in as she's been telling everybody.
Okay, all three of you, I believe that you, Joe, said that Rubio is going to win, but who do you think the nominees will be, Ryan and James?
Just Clinton, Rubio. You have this tremendously exciting, insurgent-filled race with populists rising on both sides that might wind up with the most boring establishment candidates as the two winners, Clinton
James,
Rubio.
Briefly.
Yeah, I'm going to be boring and agree, quite frankly, which is what I was going to say originally, I promise you. I think Marco Rubio is quite a formidable candidate for Hillary Clinton. Very similar age differences between Rubio and Hillary Clinton as there was between Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush. If I was Rubio, you take Bill Clinton's words calling for generational change from 92 and you use them against Hillary Clinton now, and you ask, well, if these words were true in 92, why aren't they true now in 2016?
Okay, Joe.
I think it's still a little bit early, but clearly if Rubio is able to capitalize on the strength of his campaign last night in Iowa, he has a great chance to emerge as the party's nominee. Certainly, he would be the favorite of establishment Republicans of the three top candidates last night. That being said, it's still not going to be an easy race against Hillary Clinton, despite the fact that she was able to upend Bernie Sanders by a large margin last night. I mean, it was a virtual tie. She's still going to be a very, very formidable candidate. She would be the first woman to be nominated for the presidency of the United States by a major party. Okay. And you can't underestimate her strength nationally.
And a very big thank you to my guests, Joe Watkins, Ryan Grimm, and James Boyes. And to our viewers, thank you very much for watching. As always, you can get more on our program from our website, aljazeera.com, or our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join us on Twitter at AJ Inside Story. Thank you very much for watching.